We're going to stick with the Azure AD and the Microsoft Entra theme here. And we're going to talk about identity governance. What do we describe identity governance as? Well, it's going to be about end-to-end control of identities, their access to stuff, and really how we control the permissions that they've got. Made up of 3 pillars. Entitlement management decides who gets what. Access reviews are about making sure they still need that and removing those permissions when they don't. And then PIM, privileged identity management, which is one of the more famous features of identity governance, that's going to be about reducing the admin rights that are floating out there in our tenant. So let's visualize this stuff. Let's talk about the kind of typical life cycle of an identity object, right? So such as a user. Well, that user requires access to a resource. We can put that through an approval process, and that's going to be handled by entitlement management and PIM if it's for permissions. And then what we want to also do is slap on some lifecycle control, right? Because far too often is a user given access to a resource. That could be an app, membership of a group, a license, admin roles, but we don't stay on top of it. And as that user moves from organization, department to department, their job role changes, we don't really do a good job of revoking the access that they've got. Identity governance steps in and kind of helps us control that. And again, the key thing I'd like you to remember about identity governance is if you can manage it with a group, then you can apply some level of control with this. So for example, someone requests access to an app, to permissions, to a cloud service. Well, all these things are typically controlled by group membership, and we can control group membership, both the approval process and the ongoing lifecycle management of that with this identity governance process, that feature capability set. And this is going to be an E5 level capability, or if you don't have E5, you could get one of the lower level of licenses. And if you aren't doing this, we kind of describe this as a high security concern, purely because throughout our kind of history, looking at incidents and things like that, it is quite common that an incident could be avoided if the user didn't have the level of permission that they no longer needed anyway. Okie dokie, so let's jump back to the portal and look at some examples of what we can do here. And in this example, we're going to look at, again, just managing stuff through groups, right? We looked in our first point about conditional access. And one of the most common types of conditional access rules is geographic IP blocks, right? If our business is only doing business in a handful of countries, we could just restrict access from all other countries and maybe get a little bit of a quick security win that way. What happens when folks travel? We don't necessarily want to block them. So we can go through a process of managing that exclusion to that rule with a group. You'll see here, we go in, we set up what is called the access package that controls all the access to the resources. And now what you're seeing is the end user experience for applying to that. So again, in this example, I'm applying for permission to get a travel exclusion that's going to let me bypass certain conditional access rules. I could be applying for anything here that's managed by a group. I could be asking for permission for a Visio license. I could be asking for permission to install Google Chrome in my laptop. I could be asking for admin rights, team membership, all that kind of stuff. So I go in and I request it, fill out a little form, and then as an administrator, or doesn't have to be an IT administrator, purely someone that's been authorized with approvals. This could be line managers, that type of user. We're going to go in here and we can review that request. We can approve it, validate it, and then the end user gets notified. And then what we're also doing is managing that life cycle, because you'll see here, there's a built-in end date. That's going to expire after 14 days. Alternatively, we could say, don't expire it, but have that approver review it on an ongoing interval, weekly, monthly, biannually, that kind of idea. So it's really going to help you stay on top of this sprawling access to all sorts of resources, and also make, kind of make your IT life a little bit easier because you can delegate the approval processes.